There are moments in life that mark us forever, whispers of destiny that change our path when we least expect it. The story I'm going to tell you today could be that of your neighbor, your grandmother, or even your own. Are you ready to hear this story? My son hadn't answered my calls for 2 weeks. When I arrived at his house, something moved under the bed. The first time I felt that emptiness in my stomach was when Michael's phone rang for the 14th consecutive time with no answer. Margaret Wilson, a 61-year-old grandmother who lives in a small town outside of Boston, have always been the kind of person who tries not to worry too much. He must be busy with work, I told myself. His phone battery must be dead, I tried to convince myself. But after 2 weeks, the knot in my throat wouldn't let me breathe. That Wednesday in November, with rain pounding against my window, I made a decision. I took the bus to Boston, a 3-hour journey during which my heart beat like an uncontrolled drum. The ticket trembled between my fingers as I watched the gray landscape slide past the window. The New England forests, normally so beautiful, now looked like blurred shadows through the rain-fogged glass. It was already getting dark when I arrived at his house in that residential neighborhood. The garden gate, the intercom, the familiar entrance. I paused in front of the wooden door, the one with a light scratch near the handle, made by Tommy's, my grandson's toy car. I took a deep breath before knocking softly, then harder. Finally, I pounded with my open palm, like someone knocking on a heart that won't respond. Michael. Tommy. My voice broke instantly. Silence. I grabbed the handle just to check, and to my surprise, it yielded. The door wasn't locked. Michael never left it like that, especially with Tommy in the house. He was meticulous. Key, chain, check 1, check 2, and now, click, and open. What I found when I entered chilled my blood. The living room was in complete disarray, with the couch moved and drag marks on the hardwood floor. My son would never have left his house in this state. And what I saw next made me feel like I was entering a nightmare. White fragments of a broken mug lay scattered across the floor, with brown stains of dried coffee. An overturned water bottle, and several empty plastic bottles rolling around, as if someone had been drinking desperately. The air smelled musty and stale, a silence so deep that I could hear the beating of my own heart. I went to the kitchen. In one corner was a puddle as if someone had hastily washed something and forgotten to dry it. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step seeming to weigh like a stone. My knees barely responded. I looked in the office, empty. In the master bedroom, the bed made, pillows in place, but not a breath, not a sound. It looked more like a museum than a home. And then I reached the door to Tommy's room. My hand was ice cold as I touched the handle. I opened it slowly. Tommy? Sweetie? Where are you? I whispered hoarsely. No one answered. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at the toys scattered on the rug. A worn teddy bear, building blocks, a book with a folded corner on the windowsill. And then I heard it. A sound almost imperceptible but alive. A soft crinkle, like a plastic bottle rolling on wood, coming from under the bed. I froze as a chill ran down my spine. Something or someone was under my grandson's bed, and what I would discover next would change our lives forever. I wanted to bend down to look, but my legs wouldn't respond. I stepped back, clutching the edge of the desk. My fingers trembled so much they made the wood creak. Tommy, I called again, but got only that slight rustling in response, a warning sound, as if someone heard me but didn't want to answer. Panic overtook me. I ran out into the hallway and then to the staircase landing. I could barely pull the phone from my purse. 3 times I dialed 911, missing each time. Police, please. My son has been missing for 2 weeks. The door was open, and there's something under the bed in the child's room, I said frantically, not understanding my own words. I just wanted them to come. I gave them the address and they told me to wait. It wasn't even 10 minutes before blue lights illuminated the yard, through the window. 2 police officers entered. One young and tall, the other older and stockier. They walked calmly but decisively, and to me, each footstep on the floorboards seemed to make small holes in time. I guided them upstairs to Tommy's room. I pointed at the bed with a trembling finger and whispered, "Down there." I didn't dare look. The young officer knelt down, placing his hand on the floor, and looked under the bed. "Is anyone there?" he said calmly. "You can come out, don't be afraid." A silence so dense you could hear the elevator creaking in the distance. The officers exchanged glances and, counting to 3, carefully lifted the bed. And there, in that narrow darkness, curled up like a ball, was Tommy. My little boy, white as paper, hair sticky with sweat. His t-shirt was dirty, and he gave off a sour, anxious smell, the kind that only comes from a child's fear, which neither water nor soap can remove at first try. He was desperately clutching an empty plastic bottle to his chest, as if it were the only thing keeping him in this world. His eyes were open but vacant, looking past me toward some place where I didn't exist. I knelt down, and my arms hung limp, disobedient. I wanted to hug him, hold him, warm him, but my fingers trembled so much that I feared if I touched him, he would break, like that cup on the floor. "Tommy," I whispered, and felt a lump in my throat. The police officers also froze. They even held their breath, as if one word could make everything crumble like a house of cards. Nobody understood what had happened, but everyone understood one thing. Something terrible had occurred. I don't know how long I sat on the floor. Time seemed to stop. The young officer stepped forward carefully. "May I?" he asked me and nodded to his partner. "The child downstairs, urgently an ambulance." He was already talking on the radio, reporting that they had found the boy, that his condition was extremely unstable, possible dehydration, signs of severe stress. And I kept looking at that empty bottle in his hands, wondering only one thing. Where was Michael? Where was my son? Why was the door open? Why did the room smell damp and cold? And why was my grandson silent, as if someone had switched off his voice? When the older officer put the bed back in place and helped the young one pull Tommy out from under it, the child didn't make a sound. Only his fingers gripped the bottle tighter, his knuckles white from the pressure. I brought my hand to his cheek, cold as porcelain. "Tommy, Grandma's here. I'm with you. Can you hear me?" I whispered, and couldn't even hear my own voice. We went down the stairs. In the entryway, on the rug, there were dark footprints from someone's wet soles, old, solidified like memories. In the living room, where the fragments of the mug lay, the ceiling lamp flickered and lit up again with a dim yellowish circle. The officer was talking on the phone about a forensic team, examining the scene, checking the cameras in the yard. I stood there holding the edge of Tommy's t-shirt, as if it were the last thread connecting the 3 of us. The ambulance siren broke somewhere in the yard, as if crying with me. And then I understood that everything before, the worry, the journey, the unanswered call, the open door, was just the threshold. Beyond it began what I had feared all my life and for which I had no name. I stood on that threshold thinking, let him breathe, let his eyes stop being so empty. About the rest we'd worry later. But inside, I already knew the nightmare was just beginning. I only remember how we went outside, how the blue flash of the ambulance hit my eyes, and after that, everything proceeded like in a hallway, with a draft. Doors opened by themselves, people said the right words, and I walked without feeling my legs. In the emergency room they immediately took Tommy. A thin nurse took him in her arms. A second medic brought a stretcher, and he still didn't make a sound, clinging to that empty bottle as if it were a railing on a bridge. Grandma's here. Can you hear me, sunshine? I'm here, I whispered into the void, because the doors had closed with a click, leaving me on the other side of the glass. Through the glass window, I saw them working on him, an IV drip, a cuff on his arm, a lamp shining on his face. The doctor was asking something, the nurse nodding. Everything was coordinated, while my fingers turned white, from clutching my handkerchief as if it were a crumpled note. The attending physician approached, a man in his 50s, with tired eyes but a calm voice. No obvious fractures or external wounds. State of exhaustion, dehydration, marked reaction to stress. He'll need fluids, observation, and a psychologist. Are you the grandmother? I nodded with a lump in my throat. Let him have a familiar voice nearby, he said. Children cling to it, even when they're silent. They let me into the room when the IV was already working regularly. A thin tube in a thin vein. Tommy lay like something light, almost transparent, and he wasn't looking at me but through me. I sat on the edge of the chair and carefully took his cold little fingers. Tommy, Grandma's here. Can you hear me? We're safe, then we'll go home, I said, not believing a single word, because home was now a word from another life. He didn't even blink, just pressed his empty bottle harder against his chest, as if someone inside him whispered, "Hold on to this." The police arrived almost immediately. The same ones who had lifted the bed. Now they had notebooks and spoke more quietly. The young one sat on the edge of the window. The older one remained by the door like a guard. Margaret, said the young one, when was the last time you spoke with Michael? I placed my handkerchief on my knees, took a deep breath, and began to relate. The calls at different hours, the messages, how each morning I reached for the phone, how each night I looked at the black screen, how I called the landline, silence, how I asked a neighbor. The words came out meaninglessly, like water from a faucet. They nodded, took notes, asked for details about addresses and surnames, as if weaving a single rope from loose threads. We'll start the search, said the older one. We'll put your house and your son's house under surveillance. Can you give us samples for DNA just in case? I nodded. And the child, we won't bother him. Understood. But when the psychiatrist says it's possible, we'll ask a couple of simple questions. Now the important thing is that you stay by his side. I thanked them, as if one could thank for such a thing, and still said thank you, because one has to hold on to something. In the evening, a psychologist arrived, young, in a light sweater and that quiet voice, with which they speak to you in the dark during childhood. Everything is fine, I'm here. She sat at Tommy's level, taking his wrist, as one would hold a cat from under its belly, carefully without pressure. Tommy, we're not in a hurry, she said. If you want, nod. If not, stay silent. Grandma will stay. I'll stay. He didn't nod, didn't turn away, simply breathed steadily, and looked to where neither she nor I were. The psychologist raised her gaze to me. Margaret, now the child needs silence, and you should talk to him about simple things, about what he knows. Don't demand answers. Don't pressure him. At night, he might have startles, nightmares. It's normal, after something like this. After what? I asked, and my voice broke. She sighed. We don't know yet, but the body reacts like this when there has been great fear. The night was long, like a hallway without windows. I sat by the bed, counted the drops in the IV, stroked Tommy's hair, dried his forehead with a warm towel to do something with my hands, so as not to remain empty. At some point, he jolted, sat up abruptly, eyes wide open, as if he wanted to scream, but had no voice, just an open mouth and silence. I embraced him slowly, like an injured bird, held him against me, rocked him. Easy, easy, my child. Grandma is here. It's a nightmare. It will pass. Breathe. And I breathed with him, so he could grab onto my rhythm like a railing. He lay down again, hugged the teddy bear that the nurse had brought, and stayed still. But his fingers didn't let go. He still clung to that empty bottle, as if it were a talisman. In the morning, the same doctor came, looked at the tests and said, cautiously positive, evolution. We'll continue with the fluids. Introduce food, little by little. Psychologist, daily. No external injuries. But he looked at me in such a way that I understood that inside the child, there was now a storm that made the walls shake. I nodded. What could I say? At noon, the police officers passed by again, asked if they could leave me the number of the investigating officer on duty. In case I remembered something, Even a detail. Any small thing is sometimes the main clue, said the young one, and smiled tiredly. They left, and I sat thinking, what small things do I have, if my whole life now is like broken glass? 2 days passed, similarly. Whispers in the hallways, smell of disinfectant, soft soles on the linoleum. The psychologist sat in the chair, spoke slowly. I respond. Tommy listened and didn't look me in the eye. But when I started telling him how Michael as a child had broken a vase in my kitchen and tried to glue it with tape, Tommy's eyelashes trembled, as if a light breeze from the past was blowing. So he was listening, so he was there somewhere. I always carried the cell phone in the pocket of my robe, like a hot stone, and every 5 minutes I looked at it, as if by looking I could make it speak. And then, at nightfall on the second day, it vibrated, briefly and insistently, showing the number of the police station. I froze mid-sentence, because I felt that now they would tell me something after which I could never return to my previous I don't know. The phone trembled in my hand as I decided how to breathe. I pressed accept, brought it to my ear, and the voice of the investigating officer, careful like a doctor's, asked me directions, where Michael worked, with whom he had friendships, how old Tommy was, if he had been sick, asked me not to leave the hospital, and to keep the phone on. We're working, Margaret. Anything you remember, even a detail, write it down. We'll call you. I said yes, all right, I'm here. And when I hung up, I realized it wasn't letting go of me. It wasn't fear, it was a weight, like a wet coat on my shoulders. The night again stretched like a long thread. Tommy slept shallowly, startled, moaned quietly, sometimes clutched at the neck of the empty bottle, and calmed down, as if someone invisible told him, hold on to this, don't let go. I caressed his head and, so as not to go crazy in the silence, began to speak almost in whispers, not to him, but about myself, about how everything had been. Maybe he was listening. Maybe my words would reach him in that distant place where he now wandered. Michael grew up as a calm, loving boy. In his youth, he went to study in Boston and returned already independent, with broader shoulders and an adult gaze. When he brought Lisa for the first time, I was just taking a cake out of the oven. They were in the hallway. He was smiling, she blushing, taking off her boot, with the lace tangled, laughing at herself. Mom, this is Lisa, said Michael, as if he had brought the sun through the door. The girl was attentive, studied, listened to my chatter in the kitchen, noted in her phone how I mixed the filling. Then I thought, thank God my son is not alone. There will be a home, a family, children's laughter. And there was laughter. Tommy was born in the house as if they had turned on a lamp. Michael pushed the stroller around the yard, Lisa by his side, not yet tired, still kind, still looking at the child as if he were the whole meaning. They came to my house on weekends, brought milk, vegetables, some funny magnet for the refrigerator. I knitted hats with ear flaps for Tommy. He endured them even though they itched. Everything was as it should be. Work, diapers, conversations in the evening. But then a cold draft began to blow through the cracks. At first I didn't understand where it came from. Lisa became nervous, sharp. One moment laughing, the next cutting with words. Michael at first covered for her. She's tired, has exams, they're pressuring her at work. But one day he came and sat in my kitchen. Shoulders down, hands on the table, tea cooling, not drinking. Mom, he says. Lisa has debts, gambling of some kind. I remained silent, looking at a fixed point, until something clicked in my chest. I asked how much. He looked away. We'll figure it out. And he figured it out alone, sold his car, the one he had been saving for. A childhood dream, almost. I saw how much it hurt him, but he never complained. Family comes first, he said. Then, soon after, someone else came. They called, demanded, spoke roughly, left notes under the door. I took out my savings for old age, for dental work, for fixing the roof, and put them on the table. Take them, We're family, I said. And I felt a chill in my stomach. I knew it wasn't the end. Lisa was changing before my eyes. She'd get upset over trifles, slam doors, broke a plate. Not from poverty, but from anger. One day I entered the house. Tommy was sitting in a corner sniffling. On the floor was a puddle of milk. An overturned cup. Are you yelling at the child? I asked quietly, so as not to exaggerate. He's my son. I don't need you to teach me, she responded. Thin lips, cold eyes. It was then that I first thought that in my family there was a strange wind. Michael held on for a long time. Didn't involve anyone? Everything on his own. But his voice became different. Hoarse. Tired. In the evenings he would call me and say, "Mom, I'm hanging on for Tommy." I listened, pulled words from my cold head, tucked him in with strength, like with a blanket. Finally, he filed for divorce. Quietly, without shouting, like a decent person. The trial dragged on like chewing gum. But justice hadn't died yet. Tommy stayed with Michael. That day, my son was standing by the entrance, took a deep breath, raised his shoulders as if a sack had been taken off him. "Now everything will get better," he said. And indeed, it became more stable. Work, daycare, homework. My soup on weekends. Laughter in my house. But stable doesn't mean calm. Lisa disappeared. And then suddenly reappeared. Now with a call, now with a message. She spoke sweetly. But between the lines, there were teeth. Michael cut her off curtly, without arguments. I thought then that she would calm down. She didn't calm down. In a person, when emptiness settles in, it then demands, like a wolf at night. I was sitting by Tommy's bed and whispering all this like a prayer. Maybe somewhere he was picking up familiar names. Smells from our kitchen. My voice, which he didn't have to fear. Sometimes his eyelashes trembled as if from a light breeze. So he was listening. The morning of the third day began with a sip of tea. The phone on the bedside table rang like a breaking gate. On the screen, the number of the police station. I took it, and already before bringing half the receiver to my ear, I knew from the stranger's breathing that now they would tell me something that would make my whole world settle on new crooked legs. "Margaret," said the detective, "prepare yourself. We've done a second search with luminol. We found a lot of blood in your son's room." The phone burned my palm as if it were hot. "Margaret, prepare yourself," said the detective's voice. So even that, it was even more frightening. A second examination with luminol. A lot of blood was found in your son's room. After that, the words floated as if through water. Forensics. DNA section. Probability of violent death. I said, "Yes, I hear," but I wasn't listening. I saw how my handkerchief slid from my knees to the floor. I hung up. And at that moment, Tommy pulled my sleeve, as if grabbing in his sleep. I turned around. His eyes were wide open, red, as after a strong wind. His lips trembled. And suddenly a voice, as fine as a thread, but so strong that it broke my heart. "Dad is dead," and immediately he began to cry. Not even loudly, but like someone drowning and has no air. I embraced him, pressed his head against me. "Easy, easy, my child, breathe. Grandma is here," and I myself breathed in rhythm, so he could grab onto my rhythm like a railing. Hearing the crying, the nurse came running with a sedative, the doctor behind her. The psychologist was already there. She knelt down, took Tommy's cold little hands, and said softly, "Tommy, you're here. We're with you. You're safe." They gave him an injection. His breathing normalized, but the tears kept falling, and he curled up against my shoulder, as if in a shoulder one could hide a whole world. I caressed his back, whispering the same thing over and over, like a prayer. "I'm here. I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere." After a while, he calmed down. His fingers still clung to his empty bottle, like a talisman. The doctor looked at me seriously. "The psychological tension is colossal. We'll try to do it carefully," and he nodded toward the door, where the police were already waiting. "Will you be able to be present when they ask him a couple of simple questions?" "Only if the child can handle it." "I will." I said, although I myself was like after an ice bath. The young police officer entered. The tall one with attentive eyes. He didn't sit on the bed. Took a chair. Placed it at arm's length. So as not to pressure. By the door. The older one. Like a sentinel. Tommy, said the young one quietly. Can we ask you a few easy questions? If you don't want to, just nod or shake your head. I'm not in a hurry. Grandma is here. He spoke like one of us, without hardness in his voice. And that didn't make it easier, but at least one could breathe. Tommy remained silent. He just curled up against the teddy bear that the nurse had brought yesterday, and with his finger traced the seam. The psychologist gave me an almost imperceptible gesture. Let's not rush him. And we didn't. The minutes stretched long like a hallway. I quietly told him things he knew. How Michael as a child fed the neighbor's dog with sugar. How on a fishing trip he dropped a boot in the water. How his grandfather, my late husband, didn't take off his cap even inside the house in winter. And at one point, Tommy's eyelashes trembled. He breathed irregularly, as if returning from far away. The officer caught it. Good, we're not going anywhere. We'd just like to understand who was in the house when you hid. Tommy shrugged a shoulder. Either later, or I can't. The psychologist intervened gently. Let's give him more time. He's just starting to come out of the stupor. The older officer nodded. We're interrupting. We're in contact. Margaret, if you remember anything, call at any hour. They left, and the room again became a small island in the middle of the hospital sea. Rustling of gowns behind the doors, smell of disinfectant, regular tapping of drops. I was sitting, holding Tommy's hand, stroking his hair. He closed his eyes and seemed to sink for a second, then opened them and looked through me, to where it was raining, the night was thundering, and someone was entering our house. In the afternoon, the detective came, the same one who had called, sat not opposite but a little to the side, so as not to take up too much space. Margaret, we're opening the case as a possible homicide. We've sealed your son's house. The forensic team is working. Don't be alarmed, I'm going to speak directly so you're aware. We need to understand the social circle, especially Lisa's contacts. When I heard Lisa's name, I felt something twisting inside me. I told him everything I knew, how she was before. Gentle, cheerful. How then angles appeared. Debts, calls, threats. How Michael sold his car. How I gave my savings. How after the divorce she disappeared and reappeared, sweet, but between the lines. Stone. The detective listened, didn't interrupt, only specified, does she keep her maiden name? Friends, where might she live now? I shook my head. After the trial, Michael hardly spoke with her. We'll search the databases, he said. We've already requested the yard cameras. We'll question the neighbors, and there's a hypothesis about life insurance. We'll check. I nodded, and something hit in my chest. I remembered how Michael at one point brought home a folder, talking about the family being protected. Then the beneficiary was Lisa. How he changed it afterward, I don't know. I said quietly, look in his office, in the archive, a blue folder. The detective noted it and stood up. Thank you. It's important. At night, Tommy slept more deeply than before, without startles. I sat in the dark, looking at his face and mentally walking through our house. From the threshold to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the stairs, down the hallway to the children's room. Everywhere my footprints. Michael's, Tommy's, and others. Foreign. In the entryway, an image had frozen. Wet footprints. Dark, like calligraphy. Someone was entering. Someone was leaving. And where was my son at that moment? Around midnight, the door opened a crack. The young officer peeked in. I didn't wake you up. I made a gesture. Come in. He entered on tiptoe, leaned on the windowsill. The neighbor's cameras say to focus on one recording. There's a shadow, a vehicle, like a van or a minibus with a dark tarp. The license plate splashed with mud. On the night it rained, a chill ran down my back. We'll investigate similar vehicles, and tomorrow, We'll ask you for a brief written statement about when exactly you stopped being able to contact him. I'll do it with exact hours, I said. He nodded, was already leaving, but looked back at Tommy. He's a strong boy. I just squeezed my handkerchief. Strong, but small. When the room closed again, I listened to how the ivy dripped, how my grandson breathed, how the wet night dragged outside the window, and suddenly Tommy moved, leaned on his elbows, and with a barely perceptible whisper said, "Grandma." I leaned down. "I'm here." He looked past me, into the absolute darkness, and murmured. That night, they knocked at the door many, many times, and fell silent, as if he had stepped on an edge, and beyond was a precipice. He said it, and remained silent, as if gathering strength. I called the psychologist with my gaze, the young police officer too. He returned silently and sat in his chair, a little apart. We weren't rushing anyone. I was closer, holding Tommy's hand. He looked beyond me, and began with a thin, broken voice, but already with words. "They knocked for a long time, many times," he whispered. Dad looked through the peephole. His face became hard. He came running to me. "Tommy, under the bed. Don't come out now until I tell you. Do you hear? Whatever happens, keep quiet." The child swallowed. I got under. He lowered the edge of the quilt so I wouldn't be seen. Then the door opened. I nodded so he could see I was listening to every word. First Mom, Lisa, came in. Behind her a tall, quiet man. He had a cold face. Mom asked, "Where's Tommy?" Dad said, "At Grandma's house, on vacation." Tommy shuddered. Lisa started shouting about money. "Give it all back now." "I need to pay off a debt," Dad said. "Enough. I won't give you any more. Leave, don't frighten the child." The child's voice trembled, and that tall man came closer and pushed Dad. First a little, then harder. Dad stepped backward and hit his head on the corner of the table. There where the angle is. He closed his eyes, and I felt as if someone was running a finger across the glass in my chest. "It sounded very loud," Tommy said almost inaudibly, and immediately red water. A lot on the floor. Mom shouted, "What have you done?" And "It's his own fault. He got in the way." Then Mom said, "Help me," and he looked up at me. They wrapped Dad in a checkered blanket, the one we have on the sofa, and dragged him to the hallway. I only saw the shoes and the blanket on the floor. For a second he bit his lip. I wanted to come out, but Dad said, "Don't come out." I obeyed. In the room there was such silence that it seemed one could hear how the drop in the IV was thinking whether to fall now or hold on a little longer. "Outside it was raining," he continued in a muffled voice. "They opened the door, a draft, smell of wet jackets. They left, but then came back. Mom was walking around the room, and saying, 'Where's the phone? Where are the papers?' She was searching in the office. That man said, 'Hurry up, the van is waiting.' Mom answered, 'In 2 weeks, I'll return everything. Everything will be fine.'" The child stopped, as if afraid of confusing someone else's words. She also said, "If the insurance," and the rest I didn't understand. The young police officer's eyebrow trembled almost imperceptibly. The psychologist gestured to me. "Let him decide for himself whether to continue speaking." "They left again," continued Tommy, more quietly. "The door slammed. The rain beat for a long time. I was lying down and breathing quietly so no one would hear me. I was afraid to come out. I was very thirsty. I crawled to my bottle. It was by the bed. I drank, then found more. Empty. I didn't know how much time had passed. It was dark. I listened in case Dad called me, but he didn't call." He convulsively squeezed the teddy bear. "Then, I think I fell asleep, and woke up again, and drank again, and listened again. And then Grandma came." He looked directly at me. "I was afraid to come out from under the bed, in case they came back. But you came." I pressed his hand so he could feel my warmth. The psychologist gently touched his shoulder. "Tommy, you're very brave," she said with that same calm voice. "You did everything right. You hid, kept quiet. waited for adults. From now on, the adults. The young police officer wasn't taking notes in front of the child, kept his phone off, notebook closed, just memorized, and when Tommy fell silent, he raised his gaze to me and murmured, "We'll draft the report later." With the child, that's enough for today. Tommy was exhausted. His small facial muscles trembled like those of a bird after rain. The doctor pulled the blanket up higher. The psychologist asked me to go out and breathe for a moment. I went out into the hallway, leaned my shoulder blades against the wall, looked for the handkerchief, and for the first time in these days, allowed myself 2 brief tears. No more, so as to have something to breathe with when returning. After 10 minutes, the detective approached, face concentrated, but not stone, alive. "We heard," he said. "Thank you for holding on by his side. It's very valuable information." I nodded. "We'll check the vans and minibuses by the cameras, investigate Lisa's contacts, analyze her environment, and you mentioned a folder in the office. Tomorrow we'll have to go together, with witnesses, to look for the insurance document." I breathed deeply. "We'll go." I returned to the room when the shadows had already thickened in the window. Tommy was sleeping more regularly. I sat by his side, listened to his breathing, and thought about every word he had whispered today. About the checkered blanket, about the wet footprints, about in 2 weeks, about if the insurance. The phone on the bedside table moved from vibration. A message from the young officer. "Tomorrow at 10 hours in sharp, we'll come by. Will you have strength?" I responded, "I will." I put down the phone and looked once more at the room, as if wanting to remember where we were now, to then know exactly from where we had come out. And almost dozing off, I heard by my ear, as if thoughts themselves were turning into words, "Blue folder, bottom shelf in the office cabinet, behind the envelopes." I remembered Michael so clearly that I felt an electric shock on my skin. And at that very second the door opened silently, and in the gap appeared Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor from Michael's house, with a coat thrown over her shoulders. She looked around, pressed her purse against her chest, and whispered, "Margaret, that rainy night, I heard something, but I didn't know who to tell." Mrs. Jenkins was standing right in the doorway, clutching her purse like a shield. In a whisper, as if someone were listening behind the wall. During that storm, it was already late. First shouts. A strange male voice, heavy, like when they drag iron. Then furniture screeching across the floor. I reached for the phone, but I was afraid. My heart failed me. Then Michael's door slammed, heavy footsteps on the stairs, and a vehicle in the yard roared. Dark, with a tarp, like a van, and earlier, the day before the storm, I saw Lisa near the entrance. She slipped away like a shadow. She exhaled and lowered her guilty gaze. "I thought it wasn't my business. Sorry for taking so long." I called the duty officer. The young police officer noted Mrs. Jenkins' apartment number, asked where exactly the van was, from where she heard the footsteps, in which direction they left. He spoke calmly, thanked her, promised to return with a statement. "Any detail is important," he repeated, and nodded to the neighbor, almost like a relative. Mrs. Jenkins made the sign of the cross, looking at my grandson. She squeezed my elbow. "Hold on, Margaret." In the morning, the detective came. "At 10 hours we'll go to your house. With witnesses. We'll check the office." I left Tommy with the nurse and the psychologist. The boy was sleeping more deeply, breathing more regularly. He still wouldn't let go of the bottle, and I left. The house greeted me with a yellow tape on the door, and a silence in which you could hear time creaking. The forensic team worked unhurriedly, like watchmakers. Cameras, marks, bags. In Michael's office there was a smell of paper, shelf, dust. The detective briefly explained the procedure. Witnesses, inventory, and began to ask us to carefully remove folders, look at envelopes. I stood by the table remembering how my son laughed. "Mom, everything by shelves." I could see the blue folder mentally, bottom shelf, behind the envelopes. I reached out my hand but stopped. "I can't do it myself." I gestured to the detective. "There, please look." He noted, "It will go according to the list. Today, just a first examination." We officially requisitioned the documents. While they worked, a call came from the station. A neighbor from another block had provided a copy of the recording. On the night of the storm, a dark van with a tarp did enter the yard, license plate covered in mud. "Familiar silhouette," the detective just said briefly, on the phone. "Investigate similar vehicles. Check car washes in the area. Who washed at night?" From the station we went to the address where Lisa might live. An old house in the back of a block, a yard like the palm of a hand after work. Everything with cracks, damp walls, smell of tobacco. The landlady, a dried-up woman in a robe, looked at us tiredly. "She left at night 2 weeks ago, an old suitcase. The wheel was hanging, dragging, she was in a hurry. As if the ground was burning under her feet. She got into a car, some man picked her up. She owes me money too." "The name of that man?" the young officer asked calmly. "Who knows? Face full of scars, leather jacket, the kind that pressures with their gaze." We were already turning around when in the gap of the yard appeared precisely such a man, massive, face cut by life, piercing eyes. "Is Lisa here? Urgent," he said brusquely. The detective stepped between us and the door, showed his identification. "Police. Who are you?" The man slowed down, shrugged. "Roman? I lent her money. She promised to return it," said. "In 2 weeks, everything will be sorted out. A substantial sum. Origin, dry." She didn't say anything, just mumbled. "There are papers, everything's in order." And also, that she wouldn't be late. He smiled crookedly. "And look how long she's been running already." They took his details, noted his phone, warned him of a summons. "And if I don't come?" The detective responded in such a way that it was clear he would come. On the way back we didn't talk. Through the window gray courtyards, wet bus stops, sparse pedestrians, pressing the collars of their coats, paraded by. I held the handkerchief in my hands, and thought about his words. In 2 weeks. There are papers. In my head phrases formed by themselves. Insurance policy, beneficiary, signature. But I pushed them aside, until there was a fact on paper. Think about the child. In the hospital, Tommy was calmer. The psychologist showed me with her fingers how to breathe when his eyelids tremble. I sat beside him, told him about Grandpa's cap, about how Michael, in my garden, dug potatoes, and deliberately left some small ones to laugh about. The child listened not with his ears but with his eyelashes, which barely moved, so it was reaching him. In the evening, the young officer called. By the transit cameras, the dark vehicle appeared at the exit of the city. Beyond that, the trail is lost. But according to our leads, people like Roman have a spot. An old refrigerated warehouse near the bypass. We've sent a team there. I felt cold in my chest. The detective's voice took the phone. "Margaret, we're not involving you in this. Stay with your grandson. As soon as there's confirmation, we'll call you. And early tomorrow we'll continue with the documents from the office. We'll also look at the blue folder." I hung up, sat in the dark, listening to how the drops in the IV marked their tick-tock. Outside it was raining, not as angrily as that night, but with the same smell of wet iron. And at that very moment, when it seemed that everything was suspended, as in water, the door cracked open, the nurse poked her head in. "You have an urgent call at reception," from the detention group. I approached the phone and from just one breath in the receiver understood that now they would tell me something that would make the air in the corridor thicken. The reception phone cracked briefly, and the silence in the corridor became dense as custard. I took the receiver, pressing it against my cheek like something alive. The operative's voice was uniform, but his breathing betrayed haste. "Margaret, we found him. In the old refrigerated warehouse. Beyond the bypass, we found the body of a man. The characteristics match. We need you to be ready for identification. Tomorrow morning." At first I said nothing, just listened to how the line crackled in the receiver. Then I said yes, and leaned on the edge of the table so as not to fall. I returned to the room. Tommy was sleeping with his forehead against the teddy bear. His fingers still held the empty bottle. I sat beside him and whispered, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere," and suddenly remembered how Michael joked, "If you ever open a bakery, Mom, I'll be your first customer." And from that memory I felt so much pain that I sat up straighter, just so as not to burst into tears next to the child's ear. The morning was opaque, hospital-like. The detective was waiting for me at the entrance. Firm gaze, short step, unhurried. To the morgue we went in silence. Inside it smelled of cold and chemicals, like in the neighbor's basement, where they once kept jars of pickles. "Are you ready?" asked the young police officer quietly. I nodded. They pulled back the sheet carefully, as if afraid to wake someone. I saw a face, pale, foreign in its immobility, but painfully familiar. The eyebrows, the nose, the lips I had kissed when he was still a warm bundle in my arms. "My boy's son," I said as if we were at home and I had to wake him for school. My legs failed me, but I remained standing. I had to stay strong not for myself, but for Tommy. The medical examiner, a careful man, spoke without cruelty. Death from severe craniocerebral trauma. Approximate time, the night of the rain. 2 weeks ago. No marks of weapons like knives. Blunt angle impact. I nodded and each word fell into me like a stone. "Thank you," I said out of habit, not understanding why I was thanking. Perhaps because truth is some kind of support, even if it's icy. We went out into the air. The detective took me aside. "Margaret, we need to continue. Today we officially requisition the documents from your son's office." "You mentioned a blue folder. Bottom shelf behind the envelopes," I answered automatically. My gaze still there, in the cold. Michael always there. The house greeted us with the tape and the professional murmur of forensics. Witnesses, inventory, bags with seals. In the office, the detective crouched by the bottom shelf, removed a row of envelopes with gloves, extracted the edge of a folder. Blue, as I remembered. He opened orderly pages, copies, receipt, life insurance policy. He ran his finger along the line of beneficiary and looked at me as one looks at a knife that explains everything. "Lisa." I leaned with my hand on the back of the chair. Michael's words surfaced, old ones, so that the family would be protected. Then he loved, believed, didn't think he would have to change it. The detective carefully stored the documents in a bag, put a seal. "This is the motive. We'll request the insurer to stop any payment process." We hadn't even left when the young officer's radio sounded brief, choppy. He brought it to his ear, nodded, repeated, understood, and looked at the detective. In a parking lot next to a mechanic's workshop they found a dark van with a tarp. In the back, a checkered blanket and a woman's jacket, sent to the laboratory. I closed my eyes. The blanket, ours, from the sofa. In the hospital, next to reception, I was sitting like on a stool next to an old stove. Straight back, hands in the handkerchief, breath intermittent. The detective called around noon. Confirmation by initial tests. Blood on the blanket. Michael's DNA. On the jacket. Hair and traces that match Lisa's profile. We're obtaining an arrest warrant for the unknown man who was with her. By the description, it fits Citizen Roman. Regarding Lisa, alerts to checkpoints, stations. The world became very simple and very narrow. Tommy breathes. I'm with him, Michael. Now he is stone and paper. Lisa. She is Sir. I told my grandson about the garden, about ice cream in the park, about the noise of the streetcar at the corner. My voice was steady, so he could hold on to it like a rope. He listened in silence, sometimes blinking more than necessary. So within him, a wave was rising again. At nightfall, the young officer appeared, tired but alive. We've detained Roman, he said quietly. At the exit of the city, at an auto repair shop. At first he was arrogant, but when we showed him the photos of the blanket and jacket, he turned pale. Now he's at the station, waiting for his lawyer. We'll interrogate him. If he makes a deal, he'll give us Lisa's address. Don't let me go there, I said quietly. I must be here. And that's right, he nodded. They can't be here without you. Night fell like a wet blanket. I was sitting by the bed, stroking Tommy's hair, listening to his regular breathing, and thinking only of one thing: how carefully I now had to live for two, for Michael and for the boy. Around 11, the phone came to life again. The detective, voice brief, precise. Margaret, get ready. Roman has cooperated, has acknowledged that he helped remove the body and hide it, has confessed the address. According to him, Lisa is hiding in an abandoned house on the outskirts. The team has already left. We're going to arrest her. I got up from the chair, although nobody was calling me anywhere, and approached the window. Outside, a dark yard, a solitary street lamp, wet branches gleaming like wire. Arrest her, I said. Just carefully, without noise. My child is sleeping. I understand, he replied. We'll inform immediately. We hung up. In the room there was silence. Only the ivy dripped. And far away, in the night, someone was playing a siren in some foreign city. I sat next to Tommy, took his hand, small and warm, and closed my eyes to count to 100 and back. At 20, the door opened a crack. The nurse poked her head in. Excuse me, you have another call at reception, they said, urgent for Margaret. I went out, heart in my throat, fingers in the handkerchief, and already from the first hello I understood that now on the line they would tell me something that would make even the walls tremble. I approached the reception phone, took the receiver with both hands so as not to drop it. The detective's voice, brief, concentrated, detained. Lisa has been captured in an abandoned house on the outskirts, trying to prepare false documents. We're bringing her to the station. I returned to the room, sat next to Tommy. He slept, hugging the teddy bear and the empty bottle, so tightly, as if without it he would sink. I caressed his hair, and thought of only one thing: that everything should proceed according to the laws, without shouting, without violence, humanely. From there on, everything followed its course, heavy but inexorable. They brought Roman first. He maintained his defiance until they showed him the checkered blanket and the woman's jacket from inside the van. He paled, his gaze went out. He made a deal, acknowledged that he pushed Michael, helped remove the body, hid it in the refrigerated warehouse, drove Lisa, and washed the vehicle at night on the road. He gave the address where she was hiding, told about the 2 weeks and the large sum. He wanted to get a shorter sentence, and that gave me chills. They brought Lisa later, neither ugly nor frightening, tired, with sticky hair, in someone else's jacket. At first, she denied everything. It wasn't me. We were set up. Michael fell by himself. But when they put on the table the blue folder with the policy, where her name was listed as beneficiary, when they showed the call records and the video of the dark van in the yard, when they read the medical examiner's report about the blow against a blunt edge, her voice broke. She sat down, looked at the floor. I wanted the money, she said dully. I didn't think that. And that I didn't think sounded worse than if she had screamed. The trial began quickly, a resonant case, but they didn't want extra eyes. The courtroom smelled of wet coats and paper. I sat in front, holding Tommy's hands, small, strong. He didn't want to go, but I said, we'll do this for Dad, and then you'll never return there again. The prosecutor spoke without embellishments. Child's testimony, camera recording, blanket with Michael's DNA, Lisa's jacket, Roman's testimony, debts, attempt to forge documents, the insurance policy as motive. Suddenly Lisa broke down, screamed from her seat. It was him who pushed, and pointed her finger at Roman. He flared up. You ordered me to. You said, he owes me. People began to murmur. The judge struck with her gavel, raised her eyes, and there came a silence, such that one could hear how the clock was ticking, seconds, that couldn't be rewound anymore. Tommy was sitting, looking at his knees, when they read his brief and careful testimony, that part where they talked about how many times they knocked on the door, and Dad said to hide. He squeezed my fingers, and I responded in the same way. I wasn't crying, wasn't looking at Lisa. Now I only had the boy and the path forward. The sentence was dry, like winter. Lisa, life imprisonment, for the sum of crimes. Murder, with aggravating circumstances. Attempted insurance fraud. Roman, 20 years for complicity and concealment. No grandiose words from the judge, just the text and its weight. People in the hall looked at each other. Some whispered, "Fair," others looked away. I felt neither joy nor relief. It's not joy, it's a closed door behind which there's no longer my son's voice. After the trial, I went to our house, the one where I lived alone, where Michael as a child slid across the floor in his toy car, where my husband and I dried mittens by the stove in winter. I closed Michael's house, lowered the curtains, collected children's books and the construction set. They returned the checkered blanket to me. Yes, but I don't need it anymore. On the windowsill remained a cup with a dried trace of tea and the mark of a hot glass. I ran my finger over it and decided, enough. I processed Tommy's custody, social services, papers, visits. The hospital psychologist became ours. We went to see her together, and at home I learned anew to speak with a child. Without, "Why are you silent?" Without, "Come on, remember more." About potatoes, about the bus, about how rain smells like iron. At night he still wakes up, emerges from sleep, searches with his eyes for the bottle. I put a glass of water next to him, sit beside him, breathe with him. Gradually it became easier for him. He started choosing himself what to eat in the morning, asking when we would go to the park, observing the pigeons for a long time, and counting the steps on the staircase. Sometimes he talks about Dad, about how Michael made a funny voice when they read aloud, about how he taught him to make dumplings, although he himself made crooked ones. And then the room warms up. A house without an adult son is another planet. The silence no longer enrages me, but it doesn't embrace me either. I talk to Michael's photograph in the mornings, when I put the kettle on. Today Tommy has a dictation. Today we'll plant potatoes. Today I won't cry. Sometimes I manage. I started opening the news less. My own truth is enough for me. I call neighbors more often, bake simple pies more often, food that keeps people together, even if they remain silent. In the evening, Tommy and I spread the construction set on the table and build towers, bridges over emptiness. If someone cares about the moral, mine is very simple. Don't wait until the knock on the door becomes louder than your own voice. Don't consider trifles what the heart has already recorded as an alarm. Protect children even from those who were once your own. And don't believe it will pass by itself. It doesn't pass, only time passes, and it's important not to miss it. A new life is not about a train to another city, or about forgetting. It's about a kettle that boils not for one alone, about a child's little hand that warms in yours, about a morning when you open the curtains and say aloud, "We will live quietly, without beauty, without thunder, as we are." That night, when we returned home for the first time, the two of us alone, Tommy put his teddy bear on the shelf, placed next to it Michael's small car, the one that was found in the desk drawer, and said, "Dad sees." I nodded. We sat down to dinner. I poured us 2 cups of warm milk and suddenly understood that I am not alone. And this misfortune, this work, silent, daily, honest, for the son who is no longer here, and for the grandson I have, I am ready to do it. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.